notes. Just go with me. All right, so we are now going to take our spot illustrations, which are finished, and which I will move into my Assignment 7 folder. And I have different versions. I have the color-separated version, which looks a little bit muddier and more retro. And I have the clean digital color version, which looks more 21st century, even though I built a little bit of dissolved texture into it. Right? But no matter which spot illustration I want to use, in order to have it read on a poster, I need to add text to it, and I have to add a background. So this is an example of a very straightforward, very nicely done silkscreen poster, which advertises, bands. It's really good inspiration to look at indie concert posters, because it has to get a lot of information in there, the name of each band, the name of the event, and the dates, and the city, all that stuff. Another good place to look, which I think is going to fit mine really well, are comic books, because the type we're adding, if you're using it for a repeated storyline, like Action Comics, this is its type solution, which is called a title flag. So on every issue of Action Comics, they'll use this same typeface solution, but they might change its color, they might put a drop shadow behind, they might add effects like a logo does, but you can think of this as their logo type, right? Especially because I started thinking about these angry elementals we're working on as kind of a whole cast of characters, right? And we're doing an exhibit of them. But I like that sometimes these comic book covers, they'll combine words in interesting ways, like having the comics as like a sticker over the top of the larger word. They'll do a lot with kind of textural effects, gradations. This is a newer one that I like, which is very digital, but it's very curvy, and then it has this I hate banner like cutting across it. It has the drop shadow underneath the cutout of each letter form, and then the little stars as color holds over the top. Ones that we're very familiar with that might cross from comics into TV, into movies, into toys. They'll use the same logo type to keep consistency. Right. Now, we make the mistake often, just the non-professional mistake is just to think of these as different font choices. Like if you can just find the right font in Word, it will look like this. But this is actually what's called a typeface. And it's a certain decision, a certain design that's made for each letter form. The font would be whether you bold it or make it italic or mess with it in some other way. Make it narrow, make it extra bold. Those are font solutions to this typeface. But there's a lot more than just choosing a good typeface. Obviously, in this case, it's angling it, but it's also paying attention to what's called the kerning, which I think is incredibly important. And that's the spacing between the words themselves, like how much space there is between the lines of type, and the leading. And the leading is how much space there is between individual letters. And you'll notice when you build something just in a word processor, it gives you kind of a default spacing around everything. And that's not always the most dynamic. You'll also notice how the first letters here are a little bit bigger than the rest. So the sizes of the typeface matters. The other thing, we'll really want to play with the negative shapes that are made around the type and how they fill out the whole poster. So all of these are interesting examples, whether you want dimensional effects, whether you want lots of, I like this kind of tilted shadow effect, whether you want a lot of space around it or whether you want it to wrap around and have your illustration underneath. That can be good inspiration. Actually, sometimes you just want to be really sophisticated like this. And that will support the illustration best. So what I did is I did a little research. First, I was playing, initially before I decided to do angry elementals as my type solution, I was playing with this kind of phrase of H to the O. And I took that phrase H to the O into a website called LogoJoy, which is a neural network that's trying to make quick logos for you. And logo types can be part of that. And I just saw how it messed with it. And I don't really love these too much. This is looking like, a California clothing company or something. But that's one way you can do research. The other is you can just search online, do an image search. And so I looked for elementals and logo types. And this came up. This is very clean, obviously. But I like kind of the color hits they use there, and I might use some of those. This was angelic elementals. They use a serif font. This was a little bit more hand-drawn, a little bit more fun. This one's very hand-drawn. Looks a little childish. This one is like done in sports, kind of bold lighting. So those can be inspiring. And then, let's see. I looked up elementals as a comic book. And actually, there was a comic book made by Comico Comics called The Elementals. And they actually tried a few different logo types. Trying to figure out what worked. And then they relaunched it a few times. So here's one that's all a mix of lowercase and uppercase, which is kind of interesting. All the vowels are lowercase. This is one that's more calligraphic. Here's one that's really calligraphic and kind of sloppy. And then this was the very first one they used as it got introduced in Texas Comics as a backup story to Justice Machine Annual. But I kind of like this. It's very kind of hippie and retro. And then you see how those older solutions get repurposed just with a different color and in different ways, and how much that can make a difference. So I kind of zeroed in on that and isolated that as something that I might modify to work. Now, the only thing I didn't like about it is with this very edgy line work, it kind of all looks very exciting and electric, which works for a comic book. But since my illustration is water, that might be clashing a little bit. So I just drew my own, right? One that takes this basic makeup. I liked having, instead of having angry here and then setting it off. And then maybe having a little banner underneath that can give a hint to those different textures. And then maybe I'll play with a similar color solution across. But because this is from an old comic, the other thing I like is you can see the little dissolving variations in the coloring. So it's not all digitally clean, even though we want to build the letter forms and the typeface as a vector. But then we can color it in a retro way if we want to. All right, so there's a few ways we can approach it. I've got this sketch. It's going to keep me kind of focused, but the sketch is hand done and it's got issues, right? I tried to refine it and find where I wanted edges to be, but maybe I can find a typeface that I can modify that will get me closer. So how do we do that? Well, if you go to our Canvas homepage and you go to assignment sheets for assignment 8, it will walk you through this. And one thing that assignment sheet has is a link. This is not under links, it's just in the assignment sheet, to a copyright-free resource for typefaces. It's called Defont, right? Now there are a lot of different sites. 1001 Free Fonts, Font Squirrel, lots of different sites. But basically, any one I found from some other site, even from like Google Fonts and Google Typefaces, it will also be posted here. So these are all designer posted. And just a huge database of them. So instead of 1,001 fonts, this is right now 34,532 fonts. Okay. These are their most recent ones. They're adding them all the time. So you can search. So I might look for something that's kind of bold, comic, and comicer. That looks like something might be interesting. So if I'm curious in it, instead of just downloading it right away, I can right-click it, open it in a new tab, and I can actually do a little test of my type solution in there. So angry elementals. Now, something you'll see very often in logo types and in title flags is that all capitals are used. And the reason for that, yeah, so that's pretty nice. It's a long ways away from my sketch, so I'm going to keep looking. But it's something I might be able to use. So then you hit download, and we'll go back to it. But just to show you that process, once you download it, it will come in as a zip file at the very top of your downloads. You just double click on the zip file, and it's up to the designer how much they want to give you. So sometimes they'll give you release notes, which talk about who made it. And so this one asks you, this is not public domain, this asks you to email when you want to use it for commercial use, right? So but you can use it for nonprofit personal use, which is what I'm going to be doing, just offering it up as an example in class. But I'm actually not going to use the typeface as it is. If I use it at all, I'm going to modify it. This is another one which has some interesting outlines to it. So I want you to pick a few just to modify. And this can eat up a lot of your time. And what I'm realizing is I don't really need comic so much, because a lot of people kind of read that as being like hand done. Though that is kind of fun. What I want is just kind of bolded. That's fun and cartoony, but it's a little too non-serious. So I might look up other ways, like blocky. Let's try just bold. And then we can go to themes. And instead of trying to find the terms, like retro might be interesting, just retro fonts. And actually, this one is pretty close to what I sketched, right, in terms of the actual makeup of each vector shape. The S is different. The G is a little different, but I think that's going to be pretty useful. So I'm going to download all of these. Any that I think could be helpful, just so I can show you how you can modify from that. And then I'm also going to show you how I can make my own within Illustrator. This is a great tattoo one. Now you don't want the typeface to pull attention from your illustration. And often I'll do this. I'll just do a quick screen grab, targeted screen grab of the ones I like the most. It will save them right to the desktop. So that I remember the name of that typeface when I'm in Illustrator. Because as you can imagine, we end up building up a long list of typefaces.